Now, she's the original screen siren from the golden age of Hollywood, and the world's fascination with Marilyn Monroe continues, even 50 years after her death. And fashion photographer Milton H. Green famously shot the actress.
The final hours of Marilyn Monroe's life have long been shrouded in an intoxicating haze of glamour, tragedy, and unanswered questions. On the evening of August 4th, 1962, in her modest Brentwood home, the world's most famous blonde was found lifeless in her bed, her phone still clutched in her hand. She was 36 years old, and her sudden passing instantly transformed her from a star into a legend. But it also ignited one of the most enduring mysteries in Hollywood history. A blend of suspicion, rumor, and speculation that continues to spark debate more than 6 decades later. Before we start, smash the like and subscribe buttons for more updates. Monroe's story had always been a compelling paradox. Born Norma Jean Mortensen on June 1, 1926 in Los Angeles, she came into a world of instability. Her mother, Gladys Pearl Baker, suffered from severe mental illness and was unable to care for her, leading to a childhood spent in foster homes and orphanages. From a young age, she craved stability and affection, yet she was repeatedly denied both. Despite this unstable upbringing, she possessed an almost magnetic presence, a luminosity that would later translate effortlessly onto film. Her path to stardom began when she was working in a munitions factory during World War II. A photographer noticed her striking beauty, and soon, Norma Jean was reinventing herself as Marilyn Monroe, a name chosen to fit the glamorous mold of Hollywood's golden age. What followed was a meteoric rise, from modeling to small film roles, and eventually to becoming the face of 20th Century Fox's most bankable productions. Monroe's on-screen persona was a masterwork, the perfect combination of innocence, seduction, and charm. She became an icon through films like Gentlemen Prefer Blondes, How to Marry a Millionaire, The 7-Year Itch, and Some Like It Hot. Yet behind the carefully crafted image of the carefree bombshell was a woman wrestling with crippling self-doubt, chronic insomnia, and a profound sense of isolation. Friends and colleagues often remarked that Marilyn was never far from tears. She was deeply insecure about her abilities as an actress, a wound made worse by a studio system that valued her more as a symbol than as a serious performer. She fought against typecasting, studying at the Actors Studio in New York under Lee Strasberg in an effort to be taken seriously. But Hollywood's appetite for her image rarely aligned with her artistic ambitions. Her personal life, much like her career, was marked by turbulence. She married 3 times. First to James Dougherty, a merchant marine, when she was just 16, then to baseball legend Joe DiMaggio, whose love for her was fierce but often possessive, and finally to playwright Arthur Miller, a relationship filled with intense passion and devastating disappointment. Each marriage ended in divorce, leaving her yearning for the stable, unconditional love she never had as a child. The media often portrayed her romantic life as scandalous, but in truth, she was a woman in search of safety in a world that constantly commodified her. By the early 1960s, Monroe's mental health was deteriorating. She was frequently ill, both physically and emotionally, and had become heavily dependent on prescription medications, particularly barbiturates and sleeping pills. Years of insomnia had led to a dangerous cycle of drug use, pills to sleep, stimulants to wake up, that blurred the lines between necessity and dependency. Studio executives, frustrated with her lateness and erratic behavior, began to see her as a liability. She had been fired from the set of Something's Got to Give in 1962, though there were later talks of rehiring her after public sympathy surged. Her friendships and associations with powerful men further fueled the intrigue surrounding her life and death. She was known to have had close, and possibly romantic, relationships with President John F. Kennedy and his brother, Attorney General Robert F. Kennedy. The nature of these relationships remains a subject of speculation, but the whispers of political scandal have been impossible to silence. To some, Marilyn was not just a movie star, but a woman entangled in dangerous affairs at the highest levels of power. On that fateful August weekend, Monroe's psychiatrist, Dr. Ralph Greenson, had reportedly asked her housekeeper, Eunice Murray, to stay overnight with her. The details of what happened in the hours leading up to her death have never been fully agreed upon. According to the official account, Murray awoke in the middle of the night and sensed something was wrong. Finding Monroe's bedroom door locked, she called Dr. Greenson, who then broke a window to gain entry, and discovered her lying face down on the bed, nude, with an empty bottle of Nembutal beside her. The Los Angeles County Coroner's Office ruled her death as a probable suicide by barbiturate overdose, noting her long history of depression and previous suicide attempts. The autopsy report indicated an acute overdose of chloral hydrate and Nembutal. Yet from the moment the news broke, the circumstances raised eyebrows. Why had her housekeeper called Monroe's psychiatrist before calling the police? Why were there inconsistencies in witness statements? And why did the timeline of events seem hazy, with reports suggesting hours passed before authorities were notified? Rumors of foul play began almost immediately. Some believed she had been silenced because of what she knew about the Kennedy brothers and their political dealings. Others speculated that the mafia had been involved, using her as a pawn in their war against the Kennedys. There were even claims that government agencies feared she might publicly reveal classified information she had learned through her intimate connections. These theories were bolstered by allegations that certain files related to her death had been tampered with or destroyed. Adding to the confusion was the absence of pill residue in her stomach, which led some medical experts to question whether she had ingested the drugs orally at all. This gave rise to the theory that she may have been administered a fatal dose via injection or suppository, a method that would leave fewer obvious traces. While these ideas remain speculative, they have endured in popular imagination, fed by decades of documentaries, books, and investigative reports. Friends who knew Marilyn intimately were divided. Some insisted that she had been in relatively good spirits in the days leading up to her death, buoyed by the possibility of reconciling with 20th Century Fox and moving forward with her career. Others recalled her expressing feelings of hopelessness, struggling under the weight of public scrutiny, and feeling abandoned by those she trusted most. The truth may lie somewhere in between, a fragile emotional state worsened by powerful sedatives, leaving her vulnerable to either a tragic accident or deliberate harm. The public reaction to her passing was one of shock and grief. Crowds gathered outside the mortuary, and Hollywood's elite attended her funeral, many in tears. Joe DiMaggio, who organized the service, famously banned members of the Hollywood press and the Kennedy family from attending. For the next 20 years, DiMaggio had flowers delivered to her grave 3 times a week, a gesture that spoke volumes about the depth of his love and regret. Over time, Marilyn Monroe's death has become more than just a Hollywood tragedy. It has evolved into a cultural touchstone for the fragility of fame. She has been immortalized in art, music, literature, and film. Her face as recognizable now as it was in the height of her career. Yet, the circumstances of her death continue to inspire fascination because they refuse to fit neatly into a single narrative. The conspiracy theories have never fully disappeared. In the 1970s, Los Angeles District Attorney John Van de Kamp reopened the investigation, reviewing the original evidence and conducting new interviews. The report concluded there was no credible evidence of murder, but it acknowledged that the case had been mishandled and that many questions remained unanswered. Even today, some retired law enforcement officials and medical professionals maintain that the official verdict of probable suicide was a convenient way to close the case without inviting political scandal. Psychologically, Monroe's life was a study in contradictions. She could be vivacious and playful one moment, then withdrawn and melancholy the next. She thrived under the camera's gaze, yet longed for a private existence away from it. Her fame was both a blessing and a curse. It gave her wealth, beauty, and adoration, but it also magnified her vulnerabilities. She was a woman constantly at the mercy of public opinion, studio demands, and the men who claimed to love her. One of the most haunting aspects of her story is how aware she seemed to be of her own myth. She understood that Marilyn Monroe was a creation, a role she played so convincingly that the world forgot about Norma Jean. She once remarked, "Fame will go by, and so long I've had you, fame." The statement feels eerily prescient, as if she recognized that her stardom was both temporary and dangerous. In the years since her death, every new revelation, whether it's a newly released FBI file, an uncovered photograph, or a first-hand account from someone in her inner circle, has been scrutinized for clues. The mystery surrounding her final night has been kept alive not only by conspiracy theorists, but also by a public unwilling to accept that such a vibrant, beautiful, and talented woman could simply be gone in such a lonely way. Marilyn Monroe's death, whether the result of her own despair or the machinations of forces beyond her control, remains one of Hollywood's most enduring enigmas. It is a reminder that beneath the shimmer of fame lies a complex and often perilous reality. The pressures she faced, to be perfect, to be desirable, to be endlessly entertaining, were immense, and they took a toll that no amount of money, beauty, or success could erase. Her legacy endures not just in the films she made, or the photographs that captured her at her most radiant, but in the ongoing fascination with the truth of her life and death. She was more than a tragic headline. She was a woman who dared to dream beyond the limits imposed on her, who battled inner demons while the world watched, and who left behind a story that refuses to be neatly resolved. Even now, as the decades pass, Marilyn Monroe remains both a symbol of timeless glamour and a cautionary tale about the dangerous seduction of celebrity. The mystery surrounding her final hours ensures that her name will always be spoken with a mixture of admiration, sadness, and curiosity, the very elements that made her unforgettable in life and immortal in death. By the summer of 1962, Marilyn Monroe's life had become a fragile balancing act between the demands of her career, her private battles with emotional instability, and the increasingly tangled web of relationships that connected her to some of the most powerful men in America. While her public image radiated a playful and seductive confidence, in private she was often deeply introspective, keeping extensive notebooks filled with personal thoughts, poetry, and observations about the world around her. These writings, later published, revealed a side of Monroe that contrasted sharply with the light-hearted persona crafted for the silver screen, a woman who questioned her worth, pondered her identity, and feared that the warmth of human connection might forever elude her. One of the most compelling threads in her final months was her link to the Kennedy brothers. Accounts from friends, journalists, and later biographers suggest that her connection to President John F. Kennedy began in the early 1960s, most famously culminating in her sultry performance of Happy Birthday, Mr. President at Madison Square Garden in May 1962. The image of Marilyn in that glittering, skin-tight gown whispering the song into the microphone has become one of the most iconic moments in pop culture, but it was also a moment that fueled speculation about a romantic relationship. According to some insiders, the affair with JFK was brief, perhaps no more than a few encounters, but intoxicating nonetheless. Others claim it was more emotionally charged, though Monroe may have misread the president's intentions, believing there was room for something deeper. By mid-1962, rumors were circulating that she had also developed a close bond, possibly an affair, with Robert F. Kennedy. Unlike JFK, Robert was perceived as more serious, more idealistic, and perhaps more cautious about the political implications of such a connection. Some who knew Marilyn at the time claimed she was enamored with Robert's intellect and moral drive, while others suggested she saw him as a possible savior figure who might offer the stability and purpose she longed for. What is clear is that she spoke of him fondly to friends, sometimes hinting that she felt she had been passed from one brother to the other, a remark that, true or not, underscores the vulnerability she must have felt in such circles. It is within this charged political and emotional atmosphere that her death takes on an even more complicated tone. Several authors and investigative journalists would claim that Marilyn kept a red diary, a notebook allegedly filled with sensitive information about political affairs, foreign policy discussions, and personal secrets she had gleaned from her time with the Kennedys. Whether such a diary ever truly existed remains unproven, but its rumored existence has been central to many theories that suggest her death was not self-inflicted. If she did possess politically damaging knowledge, it is not hard to imagine why certain parties might have viewed her as a liability. Beyond political intrigue, the Hollywood environment of the early 1960s was itself a pressure cooker. Monroe had achieved a rare level of fame, but fame in her era was policed by studio executives, gossip columnists, and publicists who all had a stake in controlling the narrative. Stars were expected to be endlessly marketable, and any sign of instability could jeopardize not only their career, but also the studio's investments. Marilyn's behavior on the set of Something's Got to Give, arriving late, missing days entirely, and clashing with directors, had made her an easy target for negative press. However, what many overlooked was that her absences were often the result of genuine illness, both physical and psychological. She had undergone gallbladder surgery in 1961, suffered from chronic sinusitis, and battled the exhaustion brought on by insomnia and medication use. Her medical treatment during this time was, by modern standards, troubling. Marilyn was under the care of multiple doctors, each prescribing her different medications without always coordinating with one another. It was not uncommon for her to receive overlapping prescriptions for barbiturates, tranquilizers, and sedatives, sometimes at dangerously high dosages. Friends later remarked that her nightstand resembled a small pharmacy. In this context, it is not difficult to see how an accidental overdose could occur, even without suicidal intent. The people surrounding her in those final days have also come under intense scrutiny. Dr. Ralph Greenson, her psychiatrist, was a central figure in her life at the time, visiting her almost daily and, according to some, becoming uncomfortably involved in her personal affairs. Eunice Murray, her housekeeper, had been employed by Monroe for some time but was also reportedly close to Greenson. Critics of the official narrative have pointed out that the sequence of calls on the night of her death, first to Greenson, then to another doctor, and only later to the police, was unusual and may have been an attempt to manage the situation privately before law enforcement became involved. There are also peculiarities in the physical evidence. One detail often cited by skeptics is the absence of water glasses or cups in her bedroom, despite the fact that such a large dose of barbiturates would normally require water to swallow. Another is the suggestion that the position of her body seemed staged, lying neatly with the phone in her hand, as if frozen in mid-conversation. While these observations may have innocent explanations, they have fueled decades of speculation that the scene was altered before authorities arrived. In the years following her death, investigative journalists such as Anthony Summers and Donald H. Wolfe published works that leaned heavily into the theory of foul play, each proposing slightly different scenarios, but united in the belief that the official account left too many gaps. Summers, for example, suggested that Marilyn died during a heated argument with Robert Kennedy, who was allegedly visiting her that night, and that the death was accidental but subsequently covered up to avoid scandal. Wolfe went further, implying a coordinated effort by government agencies to remove a potential political liability. While mainstream historians and law enforcement agencies have not endorsed these claims, their persistence in popular culture speaks to the public's enduring suspicion. One factor that continues to complicate any clear conclusion is the role of the media in shaping the narrative. Reporters seized on every salacious detail they could find, often blending fact with rumor. Headlines spoke of Marilyn's lonely death, framing her as a tragic victim of her own insecurities and the pressures of stardom. This narrative resonated deeply with the public, who were already familiar with the trope of the beautiful but doomed Hollywood starlet. However, it also overshadowed more nuanced examinations of her mental health, the politics of the time, and the systemic exploitation she endured. The cultural impact of her passing was immediate. Young women saw in her both the dangers and the allure of fame, while men often romanticized her as the ultimate unattainable beauty. Artists from Andy Warhol to Elton John would later immortalize her in their work, reinforcing her status as a pop culture icon. Yet beneath the glossy images and tributes was a lingering sense of injustice, the feeling that her story had ended too soon, under circumstances that were never fully explained. Her funeral, held at the Westwood Village Memorial Park Cemetery, was a modest affair by Hollywood standards, but heavy with emotion. Joe DiMaggio's decision to exclude many from the guest list, especially members of the Kennedy family, was seen by some as an act of defiance, perhaps even an accusation. After the service, DiMaggio famously told friends, "I'll never forgive them," though he never clarified exactly whom he meant. In the decades since, her name has been invoked in countless debates about mental health, celebrity culture, and the treatment of women in the public eye. Modern retellings of her life often emphasize the contradictions she embodied. A woman who could light up a room yet feel crushingly alone within it, who was desired by millions yet struggled to find one person she could truly trust. New information occasionally surfaces, reigniting the debate. In 1982, the Los Angeles County District Attorney's Office conducted a threshold inquiry into the possibility of reopening the case. While they concluded there was no credible evidence to suggest homicide, the report acknowledged that there were inconsistencies in the original investigation and that many key witnesses were no longer alive to provide clarity. Declassified FBI files have hinted at the extent of government interest in Marilyn's activities, though nothing conclusive about her death has emerged. What keeps the mystery alive is not just the possibility of conspiracy, but the way her life seemed to be building toward a climax that never came. In the weeks before her death, there were signs of both despair and renewal. She was in talks to remarry DiMaggio, had expressed excitement about upcoming film projects, and was reconnecting with old friends. At the same time, she confided feelings of betrayal and hopelessness, as if she sensed that the people around her were not always acting in her best interest. This duality, hope and despair coexisting, makes it difficult to reduce her death to a single cause. In cultural memory, Marilyn Monroe's demise serves as a prism through which people project their own interpretations of fame, vulnerability, and power. For some, she is the ultimate cautionary tale about the human cost of celebrity, a victim of the relentless demands of the entertainment industry. For others, she is a figure caught in the crossfire of political intrigue, silenced before she could speak her truth. And for many, she remains an enigma, her life and death defying simple explanation. Even her burial site has become a place of pilgrimage, with fans leaving flowers, letters, and tokens of affection. Each visitor brings their own version of Marilyn with them: the bubbly comedic actress, the serious dramatic student, the lover of powerful men, the lonely orphan searching for a home. That she can be all of these things at once is part of what makes her legacy so enduring. The fascination with her death also reveals something about society's relationship with tragedy. There is a tendency to seek meaning in loss, to believe that events happen for a reason, even if that reason is dark or hidden. In Marilyn's case, the ambiguity invites endless interpretation, allowing each generation to discover her anew, to imagine what might have been, and to wonder whether justice was ever truly served. The questions that remain unanswered, about the Red Diary, about the final phone calls, about the visitors who may have come and gone from her home that night, are unlikely ever to be resolved definitively. The passage of time has only deepened the shadows around her story as witnesses pass away and physical evidence fades. What endures is the sense that the truth, whatever it may be, was deliberately obscured, leaving the public with only fragments from which to construct the larger picture. Marilyn Monroe's story is not solely about her death, but about the collision of vulnerability and power, of personal longing and public image. She lived at the intersection of Hollywood fantasy and political reality, a place where the lines between truth and fabrication were constantly blurred. Her life was a testament to the intoxicating allure of stardom, and her death remains a reminder of its perils. The woman born Norma Jean could not have imagined, growing up in foster homes, that she would one day be mourned around the world, her face reproduced endlessly on posters, magazine covers, and screens. Nor could she have foreseen that her passing would spark decades of investigation, debate, and speculation. Yet perhaps she understood more than anyone else that her image would outlive her, that the myth of Marilyn Monroe would become larger than the woman herself. And so, the mystery continues, not only of how she died, but of who she truly was. Was she the innocent ingenue caught in a dangerous game? The savvy woman who knew more than she let on? The victim of her own fragility? Or of forces beyond her control? Each possibility carries its own truth, and perhaps all of them are true at once. What is certain is that her death, like her life, refuses to be neatly categorized, and that is why the world will keep asking questions, searching for answers, and remembering the woman who, for all her beauty and fame, was still searching for a place where she could simply be herself. The months preceding Marilyn Monroe's death were a strange tapestry of contradictions, a mixture of triumphs, hopeful beginnings, and moments of darkness that hinted at deeper struggles beneath the surface. After the chaos of her firing from Something's Got to Give, there were signs she was on the verge of reclaiming her career. Public opinion, often fickle, had begun to swing back in her favor. The press, which had earlier pounced on stories of her lateness and absences, now embraced a narrative of redemption, noting her beauty and charisma during public appearances. Studio executives, aware of her enduring box office draw, were reportedly in talks to bring her back for not only the unfinished film, but also several new projects. Her public engagements during this period painted a picture of someone determined to reassert herself. Monroe's final photo shoots, particularly the ones taken by photographer George Barris on the beaches of Santa Monica in late June and early July 1962, capture her smiling in casual sweaters and relaxed poses. The images are bathed in golden light, her hair tousled by the sea breeze, and they have become some of the most beloved portraits of her. Barris would later recall that she spoke openly about her future, expressing enthusiasm for writing her autobiography, a project that, if completed, might have offered her a rare opportunity to tell her story in her own words. Yet beneath these promising developments was an undercurrent of anxiety. Close friends noticed a persistent restlessness in her, an inability to completely shake off her dependence on sedatives, and her tendency toward emotional extremes. Although she had periods of clarity and energy, they were often followed by crashes into fatigue or melancholy. At times, she spoke with optimism about her career and personal life, while at other times she voiced a sense of alienation from the people around her. In her home life, Monroe had begun to seek solitude more frequently, retreating to her Brentwood residence where she surrounded herself with books, records, and personal mementos. Her taste in literature was far from superficial. She gravitated toward poetry, philosophy, and serious fiction. This intellectual curiosity often surprised those who assumed she was identical to her on-screen persona. Writers like James Joyce, F. Scott Fitzgerald, and Carl Sandburg were among her favorites. These interests, however, also made her feel increasingly out of place in Hollywood's shallow social scenes, where conversations often revolved around gossip, deals, and appearances rather than ideas. Her relationships during this time were equally complex. Rumors persisted of occasional reconnections with Joe DiMaggio, who remained a protective presence in her life despite their divorce. Friends have recounted that DiMaggio urged her to distance herself from the Hollywood party circuit and those he viewed as exploitative influences. There were also whispers of ongoing contact with members of the Kennedy family, though details remain speculative and contested. This mix of personal entanglements meant that Monroe's inner circle was anything but stable. Trust was a rare commodity. Hollywood in the early 1960s was also undergoing a period of change. The old studio system was beginning to crumble, and stars like Monroe, who had built their careers under its rigid structure, found themselves navigating a new landscape in which independent productions and shifting audience tastes were becoming more important. While this opened opportunities for artistic freedom, it also meant the loss of the protective machinery that had once managed their public image. For someone as vulnerable to media scrutiny as Monroe, this transition could be both liberating and destabilizing. One often overlooked aspect of her life in this period is her financial situation. Despite her fame, Monroe was not as wealthy as many assumed. Years of contractual disputes, unpaid periods due to illness, and the expenses of maintaining her lifestyle had taken their toll. She had fought hard to renegotiate her contracts in the 1950s to secure higher pay and creative control. But the instability of her later years meant that her earnings did not always translate into lasting security. This added pressure may have contributed to her determination to complete upcoming projects and rebuild her professional reputation. Her interactions with the press were a mix of charm and guardedness. She knew how to give journalists the playful sound bites they craved, but she also resented the way they twisted her words or fixated on her physical appearance. In private moments, she expressed frustration that so few people seemed genuinely interested in the person behind the image. This dissonance between how she was perceived and how she saw herself was a recurring source of emotional pain. Medical records and accounts from those close to her indicate that Monroe's reliance on prescription drugs had escalated in the months before her death. Part of this was due to her ongoing battle with insomnia, which had plagued her for years. Barbiturates, chloral hydrate, and other sedatives were prescribed liberally by multiple physicians, a practice not uncommon in that era but now recognized as dangerous. Her regimen often involved overlapping medications, making it difficult to track exactly how much she was consuming. This lack of coordination among her doctors would later become a critical point of discussion in theories about her final night. In early August, just days before her death, Monroe spent time with several friends and associates, including publicist Patricia Newcomb, photographer George Barris, and actor Peter Lawford. Lawford's recollection of a phone call with Monroe on the night of August 4th, during which she allegedly sounded despondent and said goodbye in a way that alarmed him, has been cited as evidence supporting the suicide theory. However, others present in her life at the time have insisted she seemed upbeat earlier that same day. The last 24 hours of her life remain a puzzle of conflicting timelines and contradictory statements. Reports differ on who visited her and when, on what conversations took place, and on the sequence of calls made after she was discovered unresponsive. The LAPD's official report lists the time of her death as sometime between 8:30 p.m. and 10:30 p.m., yet witnesses suggest she may have been alive later than that. These discrepancies, combined with the delay in contacting authorities, have fueled decades of suspicion. If you liked this video, please give it a like and subscribe to our channel. Also, leave your comments below and tell us, what are your thoughts on Marilyn Monroe's tragic life and mysterious death? We want to hear from you. Thank you for watching, and see you next time.